Welcome, colleagues, and welcome, fellows, to the virtual and live IAS. It's my great pleasure to welcome colleagues in this hybrid format today. I'm Marcia Meskin, I'm the director of the Institute of Advanced Studies, and we are very, very thrilled to have two colleagues from the Leibniz Institute today who are going to do a joint talk for us. And so we are very, very happy to have a very dynamic experience of this. I'm going to be turning over shortly to my colleague, Michael Weiler, who is going to give a brief introduction to the session specifically today. But what I would say to everybody is if you are joining us online, you will not be able to have access to your microphone and your camera, but you do have access to the Q&A and the chat button, and we will monitor throughout the event for questions that are being raised either in the chat, the discussion points, or in the Q&A, so that you can actually be fed into the conversation and the dialogue after. So please do use those tools while we're live. And in addition, we are recording this session today, only the talks, only the presentations, but that will become available on the IAS video library on our YouTube channel, probably within about a week after today's session. So if you want to hear this again, or if you want to recommend anyone else to it, by all means, please do that. So welcome all, and Michael, I can turn it over to you to introduce.
Thank you, Marcia. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Boyle. I'm head of geography and environment here at the University. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you today our two guest speakers, Professor Oliver Ibert and Professor Suntje Schmidt, who are with us for this week. And they come to us from a place called Erfner near Berlin. So it's on the outskirts of Berlin. A very nice place, actually. Erfner is home to what's called the Leibniz Institute for Research on Society and Space, or short IRS. We have an IAS seminar with colleagues from the IRS today, which is an independent research institute. It belongs to the Leibniz Association, which is an umbrella organization for 97 independent research organizations, institutes in Germany. That's partly funded by the federal state and by the different Länder in Germany. So it's a kind of a unique construct, I guess, that's different to the setup here in the UK. The IRS is very prestigious. It's kind of it's got an international research agenda, and there have been a number of links between researchers in the IRS and colleagues here in geography and environment, particularly on themes like the knowledge economy, urban and regional development, but also geographies of higher education. So quite varied topics, but that align quite well with some of the research topics that we investigate here at Loughborough. Now, Oliver is the director of the IRS, and Suntje heads the research area economy and civil society. So one of three research areas, I think, in the institute. So they both have institutional roles as well as research roles in that institution. But I should also say that both Suntje and Oliver are also aligned to universities. So Suntje also has a role at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and Oliver at the Technical University in Cottbus-Senftenberg. So they split their time between these various organizations. Yeah. So I'm delighted that both Oliver and Suntje will give us a joint presentation today on the topic of placing digital platforms in creative processes. And I very much look forward to hearing what you've got to tell us about your latest research. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for these nice introductory words. And I'm very grateful for the invitation to have the opportunity to speak to you here, and also in the virtual space, of course. The title of our presentation, as Michael has already said, is Placing Digital Platforms in Creative Processes. And in this presentation, we will approach this topic from creativity research. So another possible perspective would be to place the platform center stage, but we are talking, or we are approaching it via the lens of creative processes. Apart from Suntje and myself, you see a couple of other names on the first slide, and this is just to give credits to all our colleagues with whom we collaborated on such topics. This is really a paper in emergence, I would say, and most probably 2 of those colleagues will also join us as co-authors later on. We'll see. So, okay. So this is what we are going to present today. So I'm talking a little bit about the recent conceptual shifts in the research on creativity. And then I'm arguing why time-spatial perspective on studying creative processes is desirable. And then Suntje will jump in and she will present a case study of our very recent research. And afterwards, we try to draw some conclusions. So we try to capture some conceptual insights from our case study. So when it comes to definition, creativity has been defined as a novel and valuable contribution to a particular domain. So we have these elements, novelty, so it has to be something that did not exist before. Then you have the second part of the definition, value. So this not any novelty is regarded as creative, but only those novelties that are regarded as valuable. And you have a domain, so an institutionalized area of knowledge claims where this creative contribution establishes a change. Usually, creativity research was very much centered on creative individuals, Nobel Prize winners and excellent scientists, individual musicians, and so on and so forth. Of course, this definition already also includes the social context of these individuals. So if you talk about a domain, then we also implicitly and sometimes also explicitly, as Csikszentmihalyi, you also include, of course, the peers who constitute the domain, and you think about gatekeepers who make decisions who is allowed to make changes of the domain and who not. Trevor Barnes has advanced ideas from Köstler about blockage and ripeness. So one thing to consider is that individual genius, individual creatives can be blocked in their creativity through the context. So it might be more difficult for them to make creative claims. And they also claim that times may be ripe for creative discoveries, so that this can explain, for instance, why different individuals at different places come up with similar ideas at about the same time. This focus on creative individuals, however, is no longer the main focus of creativity research. So today, I would say the state of the art is really to think about creative collectives. So to regard creativity as an outcome of collaboration, of interaction. Different individuals contribute to it. It is important to have different competences, different cognitive frames in order to create something new via means of recombination. The idea is really that creativity is an outcome and contingent outcome of collaboration, so it cannot be predicted. Any individual contributor could not have come up with the idea alone. Only in combination the idea can emerge. And geographers, of course, have added here that creativity needs a lot of face-to-face interaction, situations like we have here. And more recently, also the virtual domain comes in. So virtual interactions are also acknowledged as important in creative collaboration. However, it is not yet really, well understood how these different alternative modes of interaction, how they really play together. how mediated and immediate interaction plays together, how on and offline communication comes together. Second important shift is that creativity is no longer regarded as an outcome, or is no longer treated as an outcome, but more as a quality of the process. So if you consider, for instance, a very well acknowledged music album by a band, then it's not so much this product that matters, but more how this band collaborates, how the individuals play together, and this outcome is more something that happens as a side product of this creative process. So the idea here is really that the creative process has to be ongoing, that the dynamics of the creative collaboration needs to be sustained, and then creative outcomes will be happening more or less on the side. This process thinking is, of course, challenging, because if you really take this seriously, then you can, as you say, everything is in flow, everything is a process. Where to start, where to begin, how to make novel claims if everything is in flow. So there are strong and weak process views, and if you really consider such a strong process view, then of course the whole idea of creativity becomes a bit implausible, I would say. So there's a desire for a process view on the one hand, but also challenges related to that. The third thing I would like to highlight is that creativity research so far was mainly concerned about the novelty aspect. So most people were interested in how do novel ideas come in place, how people recombine cognitive frames that were incompatible, and something new comes up. However, the second part of the definition, the valuation part of the definition, is not of minor importance. Rather on the contrary, it is similarly important, but it's far less studied. So there's a desire to study this interaction between inspiration on the one hand and valuation on the other hand. And so there's a few studies that focus on these explicit situations of valuation, for instance, premieres, idea pitches, so where really novel ideas are presented in front of an audience, and then valuation takes place right in the situation. But other studies also highlight that valuation is something which is ongoing, which happens all the time. So people stimulate each other, and at the same time they give feedback to each other, positive and negative feedback. And this feedback has consequences on the creative process. So it is important to have something that integrates both parts, the inspiration part and the valuation part. Now the question is, why a time-spatial perspective? And here geography comes into the play. So there are many economic geographers and sociologists of science and other disciplines have highlighted how important the immediate interaction is, face-to-face interaction, right in the context, in the laboratory, in the theater room, and so on. It's really key for creativity. However, it's not only about close interaction. Sometimes you also need distance. You need a quiet space. You need independence or seclusion. So there's a tension between this dense interaction on the one hand and separation, seclusion on the other hand. And then, of course, if something is really novel, it's highly likely that the resources you need to create something novel are not always located in the same place. So you need other resources, other competences, people who are not in your neighborhood. So different places and territories come into the play, and relations across distance, mobility. So access to external resources of any kind, technologies, ideas, and so on. And our our approach here is that these modes of interaction, the participating actors and the spatiality, is nothing that we should assume in advance, but it's an empirically open question. And the question is how, in the progress of time, how these resources come together and where they come together and how this process goes on. And this is something that geographers have not done so often in the past. So often the assumption was to have a creative region, a knowledge cluster, and then you already have a kind of a prefiguration in spatial terms. However, a time-spatial perspective is challenging. So one question is really the temporal bracketing. I talked about it briefly. So when does the creative process start and when does it end? This is really something, a kind of very artificial decision to say here a creative process has started and here it ended. Then if you take a process view series, then you have to distinguish between between the immanent logic of the process on the one hand and historically contingent events. So just things that happened, but they not really belong to the process. So this is also a challenge. And then, of course, the next question is what is at the center of the process? You could follow ideas, you could follow actors, you could follow organizations, you could follow a particular product in time and space. And depending on this decision, you will detect different processes. And finally, it is very difficult to avoid success biases here. So if you take it really serious, that valuation of novelty is crucial for creativity, you only know at the end of the process if something was really creative or not. And so by definition, you only study successful cases, and even though you know that creativity is a highly risky and contingent process. And now I give to Suntje. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to introduce our research. So how did we address the challenges that Oliver just carved out? We conducted, for us, it's called LEAD project, which is institutionally funded projects that enable us to explore, so to speak, new areas of research. And we conducted the research on platform ecologies between 2019 and 2021. And we specifically addressed a creative field that was, from our perspective, very material, because we wanted to highlight the impact and influence of digital media, digital platforms. And therefore, we focused on independent fashion designers in Berlin. We were interested in, first of all, in what way can we carve out or map out online and offline opportunity spaces from the perspective of fashion designers in their creative processes. And then once we kind of elaborate these on and offline opportunities, how can we unpack then the creative process and what do we learn across the process? Overall, we conducted about 19 interviews with independent fashion designers, as well as field experts that were organizers of fashion fairs, academics, teaching fashion at schools, event organizers. We did quite a number of participant observations, for instance, at fashion fairs, the design workshops, fashion shows. And then finally, we did also quite an extensive online ethnography following fashion designers, for instance, on Instagram. And I will discuss the role of Instagram later on in my presentation. So what were our starting points thinking about digital media and digital platforms in creative processes? Thinking about media and digitalization, we thought, well, obviously, the tools enable creatives and others to interact and to collaborate and thereby complementing, maybe substituting existing offline practices. Yeah. For instance, instead of writing on a typewriter and a piece of paper, using a computer or laptop. Increasingly, over time, those technologies became mobile, using our smartphones for social media platforms, using our laptops or tablets to work on certain pieces of thinking. And with those mobile technologies, work also became increasingly mobile, yeah, and thereby also creative processes. Meaning that overall, we expected to find some kind of virtualization of creative processes. But we were then, of course, particularly interested in the interplay between haptical material practices in fashion design and what happens online or in virtual realms. Digital platforms are a particular kind of technology or even actor when we speak about digitalization as platforms like social media platforms heavily impact the kind of how people can interact. They are therefore, UC van Dijk called it performative infrastructures, meaning they are programmable. There's an actor that designs platforms enabling certain kinds of activities, but at the same time prohibiting or avoiding others. So platforms kind of define what kind of activities, collaboration, for instance, are enabled or not. So platforms thereby shape interactions, and therefore they are not neutral, but they kind of really influence by their affordances, but also by their constraints, how creative ideas can be exchanged, how collaboration is organized. And for instance, also by creating rules, who can use a platform, by what means, and for instance, by what kinds of data needs to be shared. And this is kind of the first bird's eye view that we published 2 years ago on how can such a ecology can look like. Yeah. Center stage, you see a studio, for instance, in Berlin-based fashion designer. About like, in that particular case, the person had like 4 employees collaborating, and it's that pointer. Yeah, I know it's not visible. So you see on the lower right-hand side, a tailor with whom the fashion designer collaborates. On the lower left-hand side, you see the production side, meaning the factories where then the garments are being produced. You see the fashion shows that have multiple functions. Those are temporary places where fashion designers can promote their collections. It's the site of valuation that Oliver also elaborated for. It's a place where the collection is being distributed as buyers are there. And it's also a place for networking. And at the same time, and right next to the fashion shows, you see a number of platforms: Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that are all used immediately in those settings, but also in other constellations that we cannot yet see in this slide, because this slide doesn't show the process, the underlying creative process. You see influencer, very particular for fashion. If you talk about fashion or look at fashion influencers that online evaluate what is being produced. They are new actors that entered the stage, so to speak. And then, of course, you see the distribution side with consumers consuming fashion both online and offline. So we see kind of an ecology evolving using different forms of social media platforms, industry platforms, digital technologies. But what happens if we take on a process perspective, and how does that unfold over time space? And we operationalize the temporary bracketing, or first of all, try to create temporary brackets asking ourselves, what is the creative process from inspiration to, let's say, sales? And this is what we then reconstructed, or how we framed the creative process, the snapshot that we want to look at, rather than having a process view where everything is in flow, as Oliver discussed before. And then we put first the fashion designer and then the creative process center stage, and reconstructed the activities across the process from inspiration to sales, reconstructing all modes of interactions taking place across time and space, and thereby trying to map out the online, offline spaces that are being used and created. And this is, and I will walk you through this process step by step. So what you see on the Y scale is the snapshot that I showed before, the online, offline situations with material spaces, physical spaces, then temporary spaces, and digital spaces. And on the X level, you see the creative process as we reconstructed it through the interviews with the fashion designers, with the with the industry experts. And we kind of came up with about 6 distinguished phases that we can discuss, that we can observe from first inspiration, collecting ideas for collections, organizing the design process through prototyping first fashions for first pieces, then putting those pieces or deciding what kind of pieces or what colors go into a particular collections, whatnot. So you could say there's a curation taking place in that phase. And then, of course, once you have a collection, you start from the production, first production, promotion, and then start the sales. So when we look at this first initial phase and we say this is the starting or the initiating point in a creative process, we see 2 kind of fixed spaces, and this is Instagram and the studio, of course. The studio is obvious. This is a working place of a fashion designer that comes up, but we were kind of surprised to see Instagram so early popping up. And what fashion designers, for instance, do is that they kind of show their crowd what they are doing, not the collection itself, but that they are working. Yeah, and you also see that they collect inspirations both from physical and online environments. That could be the city, that could be some kind of other natural environments. That could be looking or exchanging with other people. They use, of course, all kinds of online media, online magazines, other internet pages. Pinterest has been, for many of our interviewees, an important platform at that stage. And then, of course, fashion shows, fashion fairs as temporary clusters, where the industry comes together in one place. Important temporary spaces where inspiration is being collected. Later on, when then the design process starts, again, the studio and Instagram is kind of a stable places. Here we see that kind of focusing takes place as there are not so many other platforms, but other digital means, such as, for instance, design programs that help the fashion designer to kind of bring the ideas from their heads into some kind of tangible product that can be then shared with, for instance, tailors that then translate this design into a first prototype. And here we see all kinds of interactions, exchange, for instance, particularly with the tailors, using cloud, using physical shipping of first pieces, using clouds to virtual environments to exchange ideas, to process their ideas. And then trying to, you know, materialize the first fabrics that then can be looked at, touched. You really can, yeah, look and feel what has been produced. Once the curation in that phase, the phase could be described, some kind of curation takes place. So you have all sides of potential pieces that could form a collection. But then there needs to be some kind of decision what goes into the collection and what's not. And what is interesting here is that you see WhatsApp as a social, you know, kind of platform that they use for exchange, but asking friends. So there are some kind of trusted valuators, which opinion somehow counts. And it's a safe space too, because you are not open to all sorts of feedback or criticism or feedback, but you have a trusted community that provides ideas and feedback to your collection. And then the first production is being organized with producers, for instance, in Hungary, in Poland, Romania, Italy, to produce the first product line of your collection that then goes to fashion fairs and fashion shows for promotion, for exchanging with buyers, for also collecting feedback. And what happens with fashion shows and fashion shares, that immediately there's some kind of digital buzz as well, meaning that once there's a fashion before, during, and after the fashion show, there's a whole lot of activity going on Instagram. And what is important for fashion designers, for instance, is that they not only network with other fashion designers, with buyers, with sales shop, but also that they, for instance, attract attention by other key figures in the industry. So it's much worth to have a like or a comment from a key person, from a very visible colleague, from the Vogue magazine or whatever, multiplier in the industry, to catch that attraction through Instagram, because then that is being shared again and forwarded and liked and so on. So here, the fashion share and online activities are really intertwined very deeply. And then sales, of course, is also heavily connected with online activities, promoting, of course, again, through Instagram, through other platforms, opening pop-up stores in cities, using online magazine, using an own online shop, or using other platforms such as Etsy, for instance, or Amazon to sell your products. So once you unfold such a process perspective, you become more sensible to the interplay between online and offline realms and the different modes of interaction, and how those interactions shift over time and space, but how those interactions are also always accompanied with observations. Every exchange is being evaluated and kept in the head and carried on to the next collection as well. So the processes, even though we cut out a piece of process, one single process, developing a collection here, the next collections are already in the heads. And so the activities are also heavily connected with processes of valuation through the observations. We also see that sometimes there are online alternatives for offline activities and vice versa, but more typically we see an overlap of activities in hybrid environments. So online and offline activities are deeply intertwined. Very seldom we sometimes see that there are online alternatives that might substitute offline work, such as creating an idea on a piece of paper that is now being organized online, but it's rather an additional layer to on existing practices. what we implemented and what we see here in our case is that we implemented a moderate process perspective that then enabled us both to, or where we put both the user or the key figure, fashion designer center stage, as well as the creative process. Of the fashion designer, an idea-centered perspective where we followed how the idea is being evolved over time and space. Looking at the single process, as I said before, is kind of an artificial environment as the sales from the former collection are going on, the next collection is being prepared. So we have several creative processes overlapping each other. But for our research purpose, we focus on one single perspective, where we try to, with our idea and user perspective, and really unveil the online and offline activities. But what we see is that it's very difficult to have an either or. Usually you have on and offline activities intermingled, and it's very difficult to either say those are online or those are purely offline activities. What you also see is that events such as fashion fairs or fairs in the early stage, for instance, there are fairs on fabrics and colors that structure the creative process and then impact the next stages of or next phases of the creative process. And finally, what our approach also uncovered or reconstructed is that valuation is nothing that takes place once a collection is finalized, but valuation is a practice that takes place or is conducted throughout the whole process. And valuation function in two ways. One, of course, everything that a fashion designer offers or posts, for instance, on Instagram is being evaluated by others, but the fashion designer, him or herself, evaluates throughout the process, him or herself too, by collecting inspiration, by choosing, what to include in his or her own collection, what to exclude, what to put center stage. Valuation and creativity are processes that are taking place simultaneously. And as events structure the creative process, events are also structuring valuation or are moments of valuation that determine the next stages. What we haven't discussed yet, but what we see first indications of is that the role of the urban is changing in that process. We found, for instance, fashion designers that really made use of the image of Berlin to link up or to benefit from that image. I'm a Berlin-based designer, so I use the city to promote my products. We found others that use the city as inspiration, but they clearly cut off, they kind of missing the right grammar here. They had hidden that they are based in Berlin. Yeah, and then last but not least, we present some food of thought or our own process of thinking, but we are building on a number of publications with colleagues where we investigated creative processes, platform ecologies, and innovation research. Thank you very much for your attention.